They said a slave's life wasn't worth a penny, but I made sure my master's blood bought every lash, every scar, every scream he ever stole from me. Last night, I didn't just kill him, I carved the debt from his body, slow, the way he carved it into mine. And when he begged me like a child, I made him call me master. I never planned to live long enough to see freedom. Men like me, broken backs, calloused hands, ribs sharp as fence posts, we weren't meant for anything but the fields. We were born in chains, whipped into silence, and promised death if we even dreamed of running. But last night, something inside me broke louder than any whip. Master Hollis had been drinking again. His laughter carried through the big house, dripping like poison, while we bent double in the moonlight, cutting cane till our hands bled. My stomach was empty, my throat raw, my body shaking with hunger and rage. That was when I heard him, laughing about me. "That boy's back makes fine music," he slurred, showing off the whip he kept polished like a prized fiddle. Every lash I give him, I counted as payment for his existence. Payment. That word stuck in my skull like a nail. Payment for my existence. As if I was a debt he'd been forced to carry. As if every scream that tore from my lungs was just another coin he tossed into the dirt. That night, while the cane fields hissed under the fire we'd been ordered to burn, I slipped away into the shadows of the smoke. My heart didn't beat like a man planning escape, it pounded like a man planning collection. And in my hand I carried the whip. Not his whip, mine now. I wasn't going to beg for freedom. I wasn't going to wait for mercy. I was going to make Master Hollis pay his debt in the only currency left: blood.
You want to know when I decided Hollis was going to die? It wasn't the first lash I took, not the 100th. Not even when he whipped me till the skin hung like rags from my back and poured salt in the wounds, laughing while I bit my tongue to keep from screaming. No, it was the day he sold my mother. I was 14. She was all bones and soft hands, and she used to hum old river songs when the nights got cold. She'd wrap me in her arms and tell me, "Hold on, boy, even chains rust, even fire dies." But one morning, they came with chains and she was gone before I could blink. Hollis signed a paper, took a handful of coins, and never looked back. He called it settling a debt. That's when I understood. Hollis didn't see people. He saw ledgers. We were not men and women. We were lines of ink, numbers in his book, flesh turned into currency. And debt? Oh, he hated debt. He said it was the only thing lower than a slave. So I kept a ledger of my own. Not on paper, on skin, on memory. Every lash, every kick, every body sold, every scream swallowed. I carved each one into my mind like a mark on a page, and the debt grew. By the time I turned 30, that ledger was heavy enough to break my bones, and I knew the day would come when Hollis would pay it all back. The night of the cane fire, when the smoke turned the sky black and the fields glowed red, that day finally came. I didn't run. I walked straight to the big house, whip in hand, ready to balance the books.
The big house always smelled of things I wasn't meant to touch. Roast meat, polished wood, burning oil lamps. That night, it smelled different. Smoke from the burning fields seeped through its walls, wrapping the house like a coffin being sealed shut. I crept in through the kitchen door, the same one I had scrubbed on my knees 100 times, my fingers raw from lye. The door creaked like it recognized me, but this time I wasn't carrying buckets, I was carrying the whip. The halls were quiet except for Hollis's drunken singing.
He was upstairs stomping around in his fine leather boots, slurring old songs about cotton, money, and God. His shadow staggered across the walls like some beast too bloated to stand. I should have been afraid. A lifetime of fear had been branded into me. But as I climbed those stairs, my heart was calm, my hands steady. I didn't feel like a man sneaking into danger. I felt like a debt collector finally at the door. When I reached his room, I pushed the door open slow. The hinges moaned, and Hollis turned. His face was red from drink, his belly swollen, his eyes mean but glassy. At first he grinned. "Well, look here," he slurred, "my little field rat come to beg for bread." He leaned on the table, reaching for the whip he kept coiled there. "You know what I do to rats in my house?" That was when he saw it, the whip in my hand. His grin faltered. Just a flicker, a crack in the mask. And in that crack I saw something I had never seen in him before. Fear. I stepped into the room, slow and steady, smoke rolling in behind me. "No, master," I said, my voice low, steady as the blade of a knife. "Tonight, the rat come to collect."
Hollis tried to steady himself, but the liquor betrayed him. His hand fumbled for the whip on the table, the one he used to split men open for sport. But I held mine first, thicker, darker, worn by his own hand, and the sight of it froze him where he stood. "Put that down, boy," he barked, but his voice cracked halfway through. "You hear me? You don't know what you're doing." I took another step closer. The smoke outside pressed against the windows, the glow of fire painting the room red. Hollis's face, slick with sweat, looked like it was already drenched in blood. "Oh, I know," I said. "I've been counting every lash, every scream, every debt you thought forgotten." His laugh came thin, desperate. "Debt? I don't owe a nigger nothing. You owe me your life. You owe me your back, your hands, your—" I cracked the whip. Not against him, not yet. The sound split the air like thunder. Hollis flinched so hard his knees nearly buckled. "You hear that?" I asked. "That's the sound of your books opening." He tried to puff his chest, but the liquor dragged his words out soft. You think you're a man tonight? You're nothing. Nothing without me." I leaned close enough to smell the sour drink on his breath. "Then beg, master. Beg the nothing to spare you." For the first time in my life, I watched him swallow his pride and choke on silence. His lips trembled, but no sound came. That silence was worth more than gold. I lifted the whip higher. My arm didn't shake. My voice didn't break. "The ledger is open, and tonight we balance it in blood." The first strike fell.
The first lash was nothing like the ones I remembered taking. It was clean, deliberate, meant to count rather than to crush. It cracked the air and landed across Hollis's shoulder like an accusation. He yelped, a thin sound I had never heard him make. He staggered back against the bed, eyes wide with a terror that made him look small and ridiculous all at once. That sound, his sound, unmoored something in me. For 30 years I had swallowed screams until they lodged like stones under my ribs. Now they wanted out, but they didn't come from me. They came from him. I lashed again and again. Each strike was a line on the ledger. A tooth finally turned loose to test how the rest of the jaw would fall. I didn't aim to maim.
I aimed to make him remember with the clarity of pain what he had once thought was forgettable. Our names, the faces he had sold, the songs we had hummed in the dark. I wanted each strike to be a bell, rung until the whole house understood why the fields had burned. He tried to plead, at first with words, fragments, nothing coherent. He choked on his tongue. Then he grasped at the blanket as if it could anchor him to a life where debts were paid with coin and not with the marrow. I kept striking. He sobbed. He begged. He used the word mercy in a way I had only heard used by others, never aimed at the men who dealt it.
"Stop!" he howled once, the words splitting like rotten wood. "Stop, you hear me? I'll—" He offered me things he'd always had. Land, money, favors. He tried to bribe the ledger to close. It was laughable. The ledger I kept had no interest in his paper promises. Its pages were filled with faces burned into memory, and paper did not unmake those marks. At some point, I realized he was babbling names of traitors, of politicians, of a son he had hidden away in the city. He tried to bargain the lives of others as if he could trade their safety for his own skin. I struck harder. Not because I wanted him to die. I wanted him to feel the scale tip. I wanted him to understand how small his coin had made him in the face of a debt it could never buy back. When the whipping paused, because all punishments, even the cruelest, must sometimes give way to breath, Hollis lay curled on the bed like a thing that could be folded and stored away. His hands shook. Sweat and tears mixed on his face. I couldn't tell which was which. He looked at me with something like recognition, like the distant memory of a ledger clearing.
"You," he whispered, voice thin as thread. "You'll hang for this." "Maybe," I said. Truth sat heavy in my mouth. "Maybe I will." He laughed then, a ragged thing that shivered in the quiet. "You think you'll be anything after this? You'll be a corpse in the ditch." "Maybe," I repeated. But a corpse with a balanced book. I had not expected the relief that followed. It came like a slow unclenching of a fist. No fireworks, no sudden joy, just a quiet that felt foreign and fragile. The house loomed around us, full of the ghosts of names and orders and old cruelties. Outside, the fire in the cane fields was dying down, leaving long embers that glowed like eyes. I knelt beside him then, not to finish him, but to look him in the face. Up close, Hollis looked smaller than ever, his nose crooked from a fight years ago, the thin scars by his temple like spider webs from his own past. He was a man who had never been asked to bear what he had asked of others. "Call me master," he muttered, spitting the words as if they tasted of ash. The irony of it, how the word clawed at the last of his pride, was not lost on me. There was no triumph in making him speak it. There was only a terrible, necessary ledger entry. He said it, and the sound settled into the room like a paid debt. But payment is never simple. For every lash I landed on Hollis, there were memories that hit me like blows. My mother's humming, the day she was led away, the way the slave driver tipped his hat to Hollis as if this were business and nothing else. Those memories were not soothed by revenge. They only shifted shape from a raw, burning need into something quieter and heavier. I left him alive that night because I wanted the house to feel what it meant to hold a living debt. No neat ends, only a knowledge that the balance had been seen and could not be ignored.
I wanted Hollis to walk the rest of his days marked both on his skin and in his mind. Let him wake each morning with the ache of owing something he couldn't pay with coin. Let him count the cost the way I had been forced to count my own. Outside, the sky was beginning to pale. Smoke curled like a finger pointing back to the fields. The others, my people, were sleeping in a heap by the barn, their faces drawn and hollow from the night's orders and the day's work. I moved among them quietly, touching a shoulder here, a hand there, my presence a thin comfort. No one asked questions. We all knew what had been done. We also knew that the world had not shifted on its axis. The plantation stood, the rivers ran, the sun would rise. But debts linger. They keep their own time, and as I walked away from the big house, the whip slung over my shoulder like a terrible badge, I felt the ledger still heavy on my back. The first payment had been called in. There would be more reckonings yet, of friendships fractured by fear, of bargains made in quiet rooms, of the long, slow work of undoing what had been built on our bones. Tonight was the first page turned. He had learned that his blood could buy what his coin could not. The weight would ease off my chest. But the strange thing about debt is that it echoes. It doesn't vanish when the first payment is made. It spreads, crawls, and lingers, haunting every corner of the room it once occupied. The morning after, I walked through the yard as the sun burned pale over the smoldering cane. Ash clung to my skin like another layer of chains. The others stirred from their sleep slowly, their eyes darting between me and the big house. They didn't ask what I had done, but they knew. One woman, Ruth, her back a road map of scars worse than mine, looked at me and whispered, "Is it true?" I didn't answer. I only met her eyes, and that was enough. She pressed her lips tight, her hands trembling at her sides. For a moment, I saw it, the faintest glimmer of something we had all been taught to bury so deep it barely survived. Hope. But hope is a dangerous thing on a plantation. It gets people killed. By noon, Hollis staggered into the yard. His shirt hung loose, blood crusted into the fabric. His face was pale, lips cracked, eyes sunken. He leaned on the porch rail as if the house itself were the only thing keeping him upright. The yard froze. Every hand, every movement, every breath stopped. We all waited for the whip, for the shouting, for the punishment that was bound to come. But Hollis didn't reach for the whip. He didn't even raise his voice. He just looked at us, looked at me, and then turned back inside. It was worse than punishment. It was silence. A silence that carried more weight than chains. A silence that told every soul on that land that something had broken in the order of things. That night, whispers spread through the quarters like fire in dry grass. Some said I had killed him. Some said I had broken his spirit. Some said I had made him call me master. The truth bent and stretched until it became a dozen stories, each one sharper, each one more dangerous than the last. I should have feared it, and I did, but I also fed on it. Because for the first time, Hollis was not the only one holding power. My name carried through the dark, in voices that shook, in voices that prayed. And with every whisper, the ledger inside me grew heavier, not with debts this time, but with expectation. People looked at me differently now. They waited when I moved, like they were following a signal. They searched my face for decisions I hadn't yet made. And I realized something that chilled me deeper than any lash had.
Blood wasn't the end of the debt. It was only the beginning. The fields went quiet in the days that followed, too quiet. Not the usual silence of exhaustion or fear. This was different. Every swing of the blade, every thud of cane hitting the pile was heavy with something else, waiting. I felt their eyes on me. The men, the women, even the children, they cut slower when I was near, as if expecting me to say something, to lead them somewhere. It rattled me. For years, no one had dared meet another's eyes for too long, afraid the drivers would read rebellion in our stares. Now glances lingered. Now hands brushed as we passed. Now silence was no longer just fear. It was listening. At night, when the overseers slept and the dogs quieted, small groups gathered around me. Ruth was always there, her voice a soft current in the dark. Old Joseph, too, his beard white as ash, eyes sharp as nails. They asked questions I wasn't ready to answer. Will you do it again? Will you finish him? Will you free us? I wanted to say no. I wanted to say I was just a man who'd cracked once, not a prophet, not a savior. But the words wouldn't come, because deep down a fire had already been lit inside me, the same fire that ate the cane that night. Old Joseph leaned close one evening, his voice like gravel. You've tasted it, haven't you? The turn of the whip. Once you've felt it in your hand, you can't go back. He wasn't wrong. The whip had left a ghost in my grip, a weight that lingered even when empty. It wasn't about cruelty. It was about reversal. For one night, I hadn't been prey. And now, they all wanted a taste of that reversal too. But rebellion is not fed by blood alone. It needs strategy. It needs silence, patience, and trust. And those are things slaves rarely have to spare. So I told them the truth, or at least a sliver of it. The ledger isn't done, I whispered. Hollis still owes, and if we move too soon, the debt won't be paid in his blood. It'll be paid in yours. They nodded, some with disappointment, some with grim resolve. They trusted me, though I hadn't asked for it. They looked at me as if I had already chosen a path for all of us. But I hadn't. Not yet. The next morning, Hollis stumbled into the yard again, pale and weak, but his eyes were different. Sharp, darting, searching. He spoke little, but I saw it. The paranoia had sunk into him. He no longer barked orders with the ease of a man who believed he was God. He muttered. He watched us too long. He jumped at shadows. And in that paranoia, I saw the balance shifting. He wasn't just a man anymore. He was a wounded beast, dangerous, cornered, desperate. And beasts fight hardest when they know they're dying. The lash marks I left on his back didn't just scar his skin. They split open something in his mind. He no longer strutted across the yard like a rooster. He slunk, eyes darting, shoulders hunched, as if every shadow whispered my name. The whip that once never left his hand now sat coiled on the porch, untouched. Sometimes he stared at it for hours, his lips moving like he was praying. Other times he barked at invisible figures, shouting orders to men who weren't there. But madness doesn't make a master gentle. It makes him cruel in new ways. He began punishing at random. A boy tripped carrying a bucket, and Hollis beat him bloody with a cane rod. Ruth sneezed while picking, and he dragged her to the yard, made her kneel for hours under the sun. He told us he wanted obedience without cause, because obedience with cause was weakness. But every outburst worked against him.
Every senseless stripe turned more eyes toward me. Every random cruelty sharpened the whispers in the night. "He's slipping," old Joseph murmured as we huddled in the quarters. "A man who can't control himself can't control others. His grip's loosening." Still, fear is a stubborn chain. We had lived too long under the weight of it to throw it off with one tug. Some were ready, Ruth most of all, her eyes burning with a fire I recognized. Others shook their heads, whispering that rebellion meant slaughter, that for every drop of Hollis's blood, 10 of ours would flow. And they were right. Hollis was weak, but the world around him wasn't. The drivers still carried guns. The law was still written in his favor. And beyond the river, the nearest town would gladly hang us for even whispering what we whispered now.
But weakness spreads like sickness. Hollis had been a wall holding back the flood of rebellion, and now cracks split that wall wider each day. One evening, I watched him from the edge of the field. He stood alone on the porch, bottle dangling from his hand, eyes glassy with drink. He muttered, cursing debts, cursing slaves, cursing even his own blood. I couldn't hear all the words, but I caught one sentence clear as glass. "They'll pay me back, even if it's their children's blood. They'll pay." It was then I understood something. He wasn't just afraid of me. He was afraid of what he saw in himself, of the reckoning he knew was coming, not just from my whip, but from the land itself. The debt was no longer between him and me alone. It was between him and everyone who had ever bent beneath his shadow. And once a debt spreads that wide, no coin, no lash, no law can pay it off. Only blood.
It didn't happen with a speech. There were no banners, no horns, no declaration of war. Rebellion doesn't come like thunder. It comes like a match in dry grass. Small, sharp, almost nothing. Then it spreads until the whole field is fire. The match was lit one night when Hollis dragged Ruth into the yard. He'd been drinking heavy, stumbling, his shirt stained, his eyes wild. He screamed about deaths again, waving his pistol like a child with a toy. Ruth had said nothing. She hadn't even looked at him, but he accused her of disrespect. Said she laughed at him, said she mocked him. He shoved her to the ground, pressed the barrel to her head. The quarters emptied. Men, women, even children spilled out, silent, faces pale in the moonlight. We'd all seen punishments before, but this was different. Hollis wasn't punishing Ruth. He was trying to bury his own fear under her body. And I knew, in that moment, if he pulled the trigger, the ledger would not wait another day. Something inside me broke free. I stepped forward, not sneaking, not crawling, not hiding. I walked right into the yard, whip in hand, while the others held their breath. Hollis saw me, and for a second his madness cracked wide open. The barrel wavered, his eyes locked on mine, and he shook his head like a cornered beast. "Stay back," he barked, his voice shrill. "You don't give the orders here. I'm master. I'll always be master." But his words rang hollow. Everyone could hear it. Everyone could see it. I raised the whip, slow, deliberate, not striking, not yet, just raising it high enough that the night seemed to bend around it. And then something happened that even I didn't expect. Ruth stood. She didn't wait for me to shield her. She didn't crawl. She rose to her knees, then to her feet, her chin high, though the pistol still trembled against her skull. And she spoke. "No,"
she said, her voice steady, clear. "Not any more." The yard shifted, breath caught. For the first time someone had said it aloud.
Hollis trembled, his finger tightening on the trigger, but he hesitated because he could feel it too, that the air had changed, that the weight had shifted, that the chain he'd wrapped around us for years had snapped a single link. And in that hesitation, I knew. The rebellion had begun. Not with fire, not with blades, but with one word spoken in the open air. No. The spark had caught, and there was no putting it out.
The yard was frozen in that single word. No. Ruth's voice still echoed when Hollis snapped. His face twisted, spit flying as he screamed, "You dare defy me, you filthy—" His finger twitched on the trigger, but before the shot rang, the whip cracked. It wasn't mine this time. It was old Joseph's. The old man had taken one from the barn, his frail arms shaking but steady enough. The lash snapped across Hollis's wrist, and the pistol flew from his hand. It hit the dirt with a thud that seemed louder than gunfire. The silence broke. I surged forward, my whip whistling through the air, striking Hollis across the chest. He staggered back, blood blooming on his shirt. The slaves, my brothers and sisters, moved as one. No words, no plan, just years of rage spilling out at once. Hands grabbed sticks, stones, blades meant for cutting cane, but now turned to flesh. Hollis screamed, not the roar of a master, but the wail of a man dragged into the hell he'd built. He tried to fight, clawing at the dirt, reaching for the pistol. But Ruth's foot came down hard, pinning it away from him. "You said we owed you," she hissed. "Now pay what you owe." The blows fell fast. My whip, Joseph's lash, Ruth's hands, others piling in, their fury a flood that no man could stop. Hollis screamed until his voice broke, until it was nothing but gargles and sobs. I should have felt triumph. I should have felt the weight lift. But as his blood spilled into the dirt, as his body thrashed and stilled, I felt only the terrible stillness of balance being restored. Not joy, not peace, just the closing of a ledger. When it was over, Hollis lay broken in the yard, his fine clothes torn, his face unrecognizable, his chest barely rising. Blood soaked the soil, dark and heavy, as if the earth itself was swallowing his debt whole. We stood around him, panting, trembling, the night air thick with smoke and sweat. No one cheered, no one sang. We only watched the body that had once ruled our lives, the man who had thought himself untouchable. Old Joseph spoke, his voice hoarse but steady. "The debt is paid." The words settled on us like ashes. Some wept, some dropped their weapons and stumbled away. Some simply stood in shock, unsure if the world would punish us for daring to breathe free air. I looked at my hands, bloody, blistered, trembling, and realized this was not an ending. Hollis was dead, but the world that made him was still alive, waiting beyond the fields. Tomorrow, riders would come, the law would come, the whip would come again, from another hand, another Hollis.